What if I told you that every profession that deals with high stakes in human lives has a systematic and proven development process in place, except leadership? Pilots go through flight school, doctors go through medical school, engineers get degrees and certificates, but leaders? We often just hope they figure it out. That ends today. Well, welcome back to the Frontline Leadership Podcast, where we help frontline leaders become professional leaders and transform business bottom lines in the process. I'm your host, Craig Coyle, and last week we talked about why so many new leaders struggle. Well, this week we're going to talk about how to fix that with a proven development process, and we're going to talk about why it works. Ready? Let's dive in. We open the episode with something that should make us all uncomfortable. Every profession that we know of today has some shape or form of a proven, systematic development process in order to mitigate the risk within that profession. I've got some notes. I'll walk through what some of them look like. Doctors spend years in medical school, residency, fellowships, board reviews over and over and over in order to keep their licenses. Pilots go through ground school, simulator training, supervised flight time. It takes almost 2 years until you get your wings. And then beyond flight school, you have constant evaluations and training programs that you have to follow. Engineers go through rigorous degree programs, pass certification exams. Lawyers, they go through law school, right? Pass the bar, maintain arduous annual requirements to keep their good standing within the legal profession. So let me ask you this. Did you notice a pattern? Here's the pattern that I see. High stakes require systematic development, preparation, and continued progression. Let's compare that to what we see in leadership across our organizations today. Let's think about leadership, right? It impacts people's livelihoods, families, their mental health, their careers, determines whether or not organizations thrive or fail, whether the cultures are toxic or healthy, or whether people stay and keep working there or choose to leave. Leadership directly influences the safety, the productivity, the performance, the quality of our organizations in ways that impact our business bottom lines each and every day. So arguably, the stakes couldn't be higher. But when most people get promoted into leadership, they get zero systematic training, zero development, zero support. In medicine, aviation, or law, we would call that criminal negligence. Think about it. Imagine a pilot went to go try and fly without any training. But in leadership, especially for our frontline leaders, it's just another day at the office. It doesn't have to stay this way, though. And today, that's exactly what we're going to walk through. We're going to talk exactly what it looks like to change this today. Here's the reality that I think we've all seen playing out in most organizations. When a supervisor or lower tier management position opens up, we naturally want to look for a best performing individual to fill that gap. It makes sense. We recognize the importance of the role. We need a rock star. We need somebody we can trust, someone who has already shown and proven to us their ability to perform, right? The challenge, though, and where the issue comes in is, for some reason, the recognition of the importance of these roles often stops there. And I'm going to dive into a little bit more about what I mean by that. Because once we fill this vacancy, and we see this play out in organizations in every industry today. But once we fill this vacancy with a high performer, we think we've done our job. And then when they struggle, when turnover spikes or disengagement continues or performance issues start to abound, we blame them and think, well, they were a high performer, but maybe they're just not leadership material. You've probably heard this before. I think the truth is simpler and more fixable. See, I don't think that these individuals are bad leaders. I think they just are a product of the system that they were promoted within. And we talked a lot about that last week in episode 1. I told you last week about how I crashed and burned as a new leader, but what I didn't tell you is what happened next for me. To quickly rehash the story I shared in episode 1, I was drowning, my team was struggling, and to be totally honest, I was ready to walk away from everything I'd worked so hard in my life to achieve and accomplish to get me to the point where I was a leader in the military and an Apache pilot. That's how miserable I was. But a chance conversation at a bookstore when I was looking for a book that I couldn't find, and yes, I'm that kind of person that doesn't ask for help when I'm looking for something in a store. A sudden conversation opened a door to a mastermind group that totally transformed my approach to life and leadership. Suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. I had guidance from a mentor who had real experience. I was surrounded by like-minded peers who were progressing through the exact same journey that I was on. And I was exposed to leadership material I never even knew existed, broken down and fed to me in digestible quantities with intuitive progression. It wasn't just some advice off the cuff. It wasn't a glorified book club or weekly presentations that seemingly never built on one another or related to each other. No, it was a system that I got to be a part of. It was something proven, something that changed who I was slowly over time. See, he showed me that leadership wasn't just some magical gift or natural born talent you either had or you didn't have. No, it's a skill set, a profession, something that could be learned, practiced, mastered, something that is often simply just the product of the environment and the people that you're subjected to. See, what happened is my environment changed. And I ended up in a new environment that over the next 2 years slowly transformed me. First as a person, eventually as a leader. And as these principles and mindsets started to sink in and click, I was developing a renewed confidence. I was developing a refreshed realism that eventually caused me to start leading instead of just managing. First, I think it was just myself and my own life. And then naturally, almost intuitively, my influence started to increase with those around me, with my peers, and ultimately impacted me professionally in ways I never could have imagined. But then came the real test. I was given orders by the Army to deploy to Iraq and Syria in 2021 and was selected to take command of an organization that it turns out had a 90% disapproval rate. Let that sink in for a second. 90%. It means 9 out of the 10 people that were there didn't want to be there. They hated showing up to work every day. And they desperately felt like something needed to change. I was tasked with creating that change. I really honestly didn't really know where to start, but I just grounded myself in the journey I had been on, the lesson I learned. I focused on nurturing the relationships, adjusting the systems and processes, establishing processes that I felt needed to be there. And slowly over time, by choosing to treat leadership like a profession, by investing into the leaders on my team, just like I had been invested in, we slowly changed not only the performance of the organization, but the entire culture of the organization as well. 12 months later, I'm happy to report that everything changed. Our culture transformed, retention had improved drastically. It went from almost 0% in the organization to almost 100%. And our performance metrics were absolutely stellar. And it wasn't because I was special. I hadn't magically figured something out. There was no cheat code. I was simply the product of a system that worked, that changed who I was, and developed me into a professional leader. A few years later, I transitioned into the aerospace industry in corporate America, ready to leave the military behind and pursue a new trajectory in my career, thinking things would be so different. And it only took me a few months to realize the same problem existed everywhere. I'd walk in the factory floors, see that same look in supervisors and managers' eyes that I remember experiencing and seeing in myself a few years earlier. Overwhelmed managers working 70-hour weeks, team leads that couldn't figure out why their best people were leaving. I'm telling you, I would look at these individuals and see myself. I knew exactly what they were going through. They were talented, they were hardworking, they were dedicated, and they were completely underprepared and undersupported for the job that they were being asked to do. That's when it finally dawned on me. As I was reflecting on my career in the military, both as a professional aviator on one hand and as a leader on the other, I suddenly realized that the system that developed me as an aviator, from a pilot just starting flight school to a combat-proven Apache pilot, pilot in command and air mission commander, was almost identical to this intuitive system I fell into, this mastermind group that developed me as a leader. So here's what that system actually looks like. What we're going to talk about and what we're going to do with the rest of this episode is I'm going to walk you through exactly how I was developed as an aviator. And I'm going to walk you through why each of those steps, why each of those phases are so important to developing confident and competent aviators capable of accomplishing some of the most challenging missions in the military. Then we're going to take that system and we're going to relate it into how you can apply it to developing leaders today. Whether that's applying it for yourself in your own life, whether it's applying it to your team, or whether it's scaling it for your entire organization. Here's why. Because if we're going to treat leadership like a profession, we need to explore what these professions do and why it works. So here's what it looked like for me as an aviator. Phase 1, first step, was ground school. See, before pilots ever touch an aircraft, they spend weeks or maybe even months in the classroom learning the fundamentals of flight and everything that impacts flight. So things like aerodynamics, how does flight actually work? Systems, how do the helicopters or the planes you're about to fly actually work? Weather, right? How does the environment you're about to fly through impact you? And how can that change impact you as well? or regulations, right? What are the things and the rules, the processes that you have to follow in order to be safe as you're flying through the skies? See, in ground school, we're building a foundation of knowledge that the practical skills of flight for the rest of our careers will rest upon. It's the principles. It's the why behind the how. That's the first step. Phase 2 is simulator training. So before we ever go to a real cockpit, we go to a virtual one first. These are safe environments where budding, freshly minted new pilots can begin to apply some of the things that they're learning in the classroom, and then begin to learn some of the systems and processes they're going to have to apply in the aircraft themselves. Simulators are where we practice normal procedures until they become second nature. We practice emergency situations. We learn by making mistakes in a safe environment, and then we repeat and repeat and repeat until habits form that keep us safe. This is where the theory from the classroom starts to meet the application of the real world in a risk-free environment. Now, there's a bridge phase between simulator training and actual flight training, and I call that phase 2.5. And what I call this is flight operations and pre-flight, because something has to happen that prepares you to go from this perfectly safe virtual reality into an actual aircraft that's about to go fly through the actual air. And that's when these new pilots have to learn what they have to do, the steps they have to take in order to be safe and be successful on their flights. It's how you prepare for flight. You learn to inspect the aircraft systematically, which is what most people commonly know pre-flight as. You learn how to review, check weather conditions to make sure it's going to be safe to fly along your route for the day. You learn how to create flight plans, plan flight plans, brief flight plans, communicate with your crew so that everybody knows what their role is, what they have to do, when they have to do it, why they have to do it to keep you safe. So this bridge phase, it's an introduction to pre-flight. It's this operational discipline that takes training and turns it into execution. It's teaching people a system of how to prepare for flight so that when you're flying, you can accomplish what it is you're setting out to accomplish. So student pilots learn this early, before they ever step into the actual aircraft. They're on the flight line, learning the ins and outs of flight operations and how to successfully pre-flight before they fly. Phase 3 is supervised flight time. So only after you've been through ground school, you've been through simulator training, you've learned the ins and outs of flight operations and preparing to fly, only then do you get to enter into the cockpit and start to actually put these things into real practice. But here's the key. You're not on your own. You're always with a certified and incredibly experienced flight instructor. In the Army, we call them instructor pilots. And they're with you each and every step of the way. It's their job to keep you safe. It's their job to guide you and demonstrate every single maneuver for you. And it's their job to make sure that you're progressing and learning and growing in the aircraft each and every day. You're doing the real work. You're in the skies, in the actual aircraft, but you're not alone. You've got a safety net, you've got support, you've got guidance. And that's the key. And then finally, phase 4 is continuous progression. And what's interesting here, and what I want you to note and take away from this, is phase 4 is actually the phase that never ends after pilots earn their wings. See, flight school as we know it is ground school, simulator training, learning the pre-flight, and supervised flight training. That's all it takes to earn your wings, but that's just a foundation. Once you graduate and earn your wings, you enter into this ecosystem of pilots all progressing through their careers. And that's exactly what Phase 4 is all about. Pilots have a structured progression that pushes them to continue to grow, develop, and improve their expertise throughout their careers. They're part of a community, and they become invested in their cohorts to push each other along, hold each other accountable, and continue to grow. There are clear standards, clear milestones. I highlighted some of these earlier. For me, it was achieving pilot in command, and then eventually achieving air mission commander. And every year, every month, there are continuous improvement, continuous progression requirements, trainings, evaluations that you have to adhere to and that you have to complete and pass. Professional aviators don't just graduate and that's the end of their development. No, it's actually just the beginning. They're constantly, over the course of their entire careers, developed systematically, continuously, and intentionally. Notice what didn't happen at any point during this process. Nobody said you're a natural, just go figure it out. Nobody threw me into a cockpit without any supervision. I wasn't expected to learn things through trial and error on my own. Nobody blamed me when I messed something up. And here's why. In aviation, just like any other of the professions we've talked about in episode 1 or today, we recognize a simple truth. High stakes require intentional development, systematic preparation, and continuous progression. I believe the same should be true for leadership. So how do we translate this proven system into leadership then? Well, that's exactly what the Lead Like a Pilot framework that we created is meant to do. It takes the same systematic approach for development that creates safe and effective pilots and uses it and applies it to develop confident, capable, and successful professional leaders. And to do it, we break things down into 3 pillars. Pillar 1 is flight school. Pillar 2 is pre-flight. And pillar 3 is progression. So let's dive into each of these pillars, and then we'll talk about how they interact with each other. Pillar 1, flight school, is all about learning the foundational principles and mastering the core skills that prepare you to lead. Now, this kind of goes into what we talked about last week, but leadership is an entirely different profession from what most of us are trained to do individually before we enter into this management realm. And so it's imperative that we have some understanding, some baseline foundation of these new skills, these new mindsets, these new principles we need to be able to apply on a daily basis in order to be successful. Here are some things that I think of when I think of a ground school or a flight school for new leaders. I think of learning the principles of sound leadership, fundamental mindsets that separate leaders from managers, the psychology of leading people. I think of practicing these skills, understanding how to give feedback, how to handle conflict, how to run an effective meeting, how to create a safe environment for mistakes and to learn from your mistakes, how to build confidence and repeat steps and trainings so that you're confident in your ability to apply it in reality as a leader. And then applying things with support, leading your team with coaching and mentorship backing you up, real-time feedback loops so that you don't just fail and lose the lessons hidden within those challenges. Think of this like initial training for a new leader. It gets you ready to lead, but it's not where your development ends. It's where it just begins. And I think that's the switch. That's the mindset shift most of us need when it comes to leadership development. Development starts with the initial training. That can't be where it ends. Pillar 2 is pre-flight. We talked a bit about this in diving deep into how I was developed as an aviator, but pre-flight for a leader is all about mastering the routine processes that ensure safety and success for the team that you lead. Remember, for pilots, pre-flights becomes the operational discipline for the rest of our careers. It's a skill we're taught in flight school, but we use to apply everything else we learn in flight school for the rest of our careers. We use checklists before every single flight, right? It's what keeps us safe. It's what keeps us steady. It keeps us on focus, and it allows us to do what only we can do once we're airborne. And I think leaders, especially new leaders, need that same operational discipline. They need a bridge that takes them from the theory of the classroom to something they could simply apply continuously, knowing that they're leading and not managing. Some things that come to mind when I think of pre-flight for new leaders are weekly leadership routines. What are the things you can do on a routine basis that keep you connected to your team? Or communication systems. What are the things that you lean on a routine basis consistently to prevent information gaps from exposing you and your team? What about decision-making frameworks or meeting structures that help you drive results consistently? This is the operational system. It's what takes the initial training and turns it into application on a consistent basis so results start to manifest on their teams. It's the bridge. It's the bridge between development and application and results. And then finally, pillar 3, it's progression. It's the very thing that makes each of these professions stand out. There's continuous systematic growth, continuous improvement, but it's not isolated. It's a function of a community that fosters relationships, both with mentors and coaches, but also with peers, that pushes you through the journey, the challenging journey of growth, of change, of doing something difficult. That's what makes everything else begin to click. Flight school gives you the foundation. Pre-flight provides a system and a process to follow routinely. Progression takes you from competent to exceptional. I want you to think of growth like an uphill journey. I always like to explain it this way. Imagine you're driving an old school manual stick shift up a hill. In order to get to the top of the hill, you have to constantly remain in gear, pressing down on the accelerometer so you can get to the top of that hill. Now, what happens if driving this car, all of a sudden, you pop the car into neutral? No longer are you pushing the vehicle uphill, but your momentum continues to drive you forward slightly. Well, eventually that momentum wears itself off, gravity takes over, but you don't just come to rest in the middle of the street as you would if it was flat ground. No, you start falling backwards. And that's the reality of growth, is if we're not continuously growing, if we're not continuously pressing the accelerometer down in our lives, then unfortunately we don't just come to rest in a steady state. We start falling backwards. And that's why progression for new leaders is so important. It's crucial because they're in this vital phase of change, the very initial phase where if they don't continue to grow, if they begin to stagnate, we risk isolating them and we risk letting them fail. And that's the function of what we talked about in episode 1. So after foundational training, what do you need? What needs to exist within this pillar of progression? Well, structured advancement. You need to show people what's next for them. Give them something to aspire towards, right? For many of us, that might look like team lead to supervisor to manager to director. Give them a clear path of progression. Next, I think we need peer community. We need to take new managers and give them relationships with people that are pursuing this same journey that ultimately replace the relationships they have with people that aren't pursuing this journey. It helps normalize the challenges along the way. And instead of giving up, when those challenges start to beat you down, you have people to lean on that push you forward. It's ongoing coaching, so you continue to grow and develop and pursue development in harder and more difficult things. And it's clear milestones so we can mark our growth and celebrate it every time. This is the leadership journey beyond flight school. It's what turns you from a fresh pilot into a combat-ready one. It's what turns you from an individual to a brand new frontline leader, to a professional leader that creates professional results. So what changes when you begin to actually treat leadership like a profession? Everything. For individuals, instead of drowning, you have a roadmap to follow. Instead of guessing, you have proven frameworks. Instead of isolation, you have a community of peers pushing you forward. Instead of burning out, you're building sustainable skills that continue to up-level you time and time again. You go from, am I cut for this? To I know exactly what to do next. For organizations, your internal promotion pipeline becomes predictable instead of a gamble because people see people successful as they transition into management. Your culture improves because you're giving new leaders on the front lines of your organizations the answers to the test. Your retention increases because people love working for good bosses and great organizations, and your leadership roles become more attractive. You go from nobody wants to be a supervisor, struggling with disengaged teams, to people are excited to lead, and you have a line of people out your door trying to work for you. Here's the bigger picture. When leadership becomes a profession with systematic development, new leaders don't fail at 60% rates. They create professional results. Teams don't disengage. They thrive on clear communication, expectation, and purpose. And organizations don't stagnate. They grow. They grow at the rate of their ability to grow their leaders. This isn't theoretical. This is exactly what happens when you stop leaving leadership to chance and you start investing in it systematically and organically. I've seen it in my own transition. I've seen it in the military. I've seen it on factory floors across the country. It works, but only if you actually implement the system. So here's what I want you to do right now. If you're a frontline leader, ask yourself this question. Do I have a system for my own leadership development, or am I just winging it? If the answer is winging it, don't beat yourself up. You're not alone. That was almost every single one of us. But you don't have to stay there. And we have 2 resources for you I want you to go check out right now. One, the Leader's Pre-Flight Checklist. It's a practical weekly framework that helps you initially dive into this idea of a pre-flight for a leader. And we have a weekly Developing Leader email that we send out to people that sign up. You can get access to both of these on our website at operationlead.com. Great tools for you to start slowly moving forward in your leadership journey. And if you're a senior leader, I want you to ask yourself this. Are we systematically developing our frontline leaders, or are we hoping that they figure it out? If you don't have a real system in place, or you're curious what it might look like to put one in place, let's talk. No cost, no pressure. But if you go to operationlead.com, there's an opportunity there for you to request a discovery call. And it's just a conversation about what proven development could look like for you and what it might be able to do for your organization. Look, here's the truth. Every great organization I've ever seen has one thing in common. They develop their leaders intentionally and systematically. Here's what I want you to remember from today. Leadership is not something you're born with. It's something you develop intentionally, systematically, and continuously. When you approach leadership from this angle, everything changes. Last week, we talked about why so many new managers struggle when they transition into leadership. This week, we explored how to address that with the same systematic development approach that professions use all over the place today. Next week, we're going to explore why this is needed, why it works, and how it revolutionizes organizations that apply it at scale. Until then, remember this. Pilots don't wing it. Engineers don't guess. Doctors don't figure it out as they go. And neither should you, your team, or your organization. I'm Craig Coyle. This is the Frontline Leadership Podcast. Let's lead.